Therefore, I shall resign the presidency effective at noon tomorrow.
It's been 40 years since President Richard Nixon shocked the nation and resigned. Was that the beginning of the hyper-partisanship we now see in Washington, or was it just inevitable anyway? Let's ask an expert. New York University Cold War Center co-director and former Nixon Presidential Library Director Timothy Naftali joins us from Montreal. Mr. Naftali, thanks for being there.
My pleasure. Hi, good morning.
So let's go with that first big question. Was that the beginning of hyper-partisanship? I know that in the days before the resignation, there were a lot of beep if you want Nixon to step down, and people were just beeping their horns in Washington.
Well, actually, it was briefly a moment of real national unity. Richard Nixon's popularity dropped to 11%. The leaders of both parties, a unanimous Supreme Court, all unified in giving him the same advice. Mr. President, you must go. So there was briefly a moment of actual national consensus that Richard Nixon had to leave the White House. But afterwards, in the Reagan era, there was a great deal of desire to use the same techniques once again against Reagan during the Iran-Contra scandal. And then, of course, in the Clinton era, the Republicans sought to use the same constitutional levers to remove Clinton. So there was a precedent set under Nixon that became an engine for partisanship later. But actually, 1974 was not a moment of great partisanship. It was a moment of great national unity and great national relief.
And it was relief, and Gerald Ford put it all behind everyone by pardoning Richard Nixon. In many ways, Richard Nixon seems to be sort of the model of redemption, because he did a lot of fantastic things after leaving office in a way that, if he'd just done that, would have been just amazing on its own.
No, I don't agree with you at all. I have to say that Jimmy Carter has enjoyed some redemption as a former president. But Richard Nixon, no. In fact, if anything, the materials that Richard Nixon wanted to destroy, the 3,700 tapes and many documents, they have actually shown more evidence as they became released, as they were released over the last 4 decades, more evidence of criminality and of the kind of politics that Americans don't expect from their president. So the more you learn about Richard Nixon, the less you like him.
Okay, well, what about the China? He sort of did a lot to open up relations between the West and China, and that would seem to be, in general, a very good thing. I mean, there were a lot of terrible things happening in China in the 1960s, and he sort of helped, de-ice that situation or thaw it out.
Absolutely true. But the thing that Americans and foreigners need to consider is what mitigates crimes. When a president commits crimes at home, when he uses techniques against American citizens at home that are usually used abroad, does one great or two great foreign policy successes abroad mitigate the constitutional strain created by that kind of presidency? There's no question. Richard Nixon alone deserves credit for the opening to China. It was not Kissinger's idea. It was Nixon's idea. But the problem is that Nixon is such a complicated man with such a deep, dark side that it's very hard to believe that one foreign policy success balances out the real problems that he created for the United States because of his uncontrollable desire to use the government to hurt American citizens. Whenever he had a hard time with dissent, he's not the only president to have disliked dissent. In fact, one of the things that you can count on with a president, whoever he or she is that they will be unhappy about dissent. That's just goes with the job. But what makes Nixon unique is the activities and the instruments of government that he sought to use against dissent. He went beyond what any previous president and any successive or succeeding president has ever done. That makes him unique, and that makes the kinds of stresses that he placed on our constitutional system unusual. So yes, China, no doubt about it. Yes, his administration deserves credit for environmental policy. Yes, he brought the war to an end in Vietnam, although he could have done it sooner. But that doesn't mitigate, none of those things mitigates the cost to this country of his domestic abuses of power. And those mustn't be forgotten, because the lesson of 1974 is that this country is strong enough to remove a bad president if it has to.
Well, still polarizing after all these years. Thank you for your insight, sir. That's Timothy Naftali, former Nixon Presidential Library Director.